We were recycling. When I was a child, you're taught to recycle, not because you wanted to, because it was an essential thing you had to do. And then we became what we call, and everyone knows, as a throwaway society. You bought something, you couldn't even get it repaired if you wanted to. You know, you take it in and no, we can't repair it, throw it away. And that has caused the problems we've got today with so much rubbish that is generated per person, and it's causing a huge problem. You're running out of land to dig holes on. If you've got to move to a new site, it costs you millions of dollars these days to do all the things you've got to do, commence a new tip. So, you know, it encourages you to look for ways of trying to make that tip last much longer.
One thing that's really bothered me about the recycling movement, which I'm been a part of for a lot of years now, and you know, run around in schools and encourage recycling. They have these vans that are done up to say, here's how you recycle, to all the kids. Well, they have lists of things that can be recycled and things that can't be recycled. And have a guess what's the number one thing on the can't be recycled list? Organics.
At the moment, we're spending enormous amounts of money in different parts of the world and in Sydney to transport our waste either out to the perimeter of town or way out of town. So we've created the infrastructure to move this material. All we're saying is that instead of carrying mixed waste, you'll be carrying source separated waste. The economics, I think, can be made to work both in the larger cities and in the rural centres, because we're already spending that money anyway. It's just a question of using that money in a slightly different way.
Tell you about the soils. The soil is where it all begins. It is the thing which makes the air around us have oxygen. It's the thing which draws the carbon dioxides out of the air. It draws the nitrogens out of the air. It's everything. It feeds us. It creates the environment that we live in. And it's so important to take care of it.
The big issue facing a lot of farmers in Australia is not necessarily, do I have enough nutrients in my soil? To my mind, is much more, do I have enough biology in my soil? People forget that the relationship between what nutrient is in soil and the plant's ability to grow is a connection that's totally biological. It's the biology that transfers the nutrient from the soil into the plant. Yet a lot of our soils are biologically dead, and we use chemistry all the time that kills off more and more of that biology all the time. And so we have to start addressing that degradation in a more practical way. I think a plant takes somewhere between 60 to 90 minerals, nutrients and trace elements to grow. We take that off our property and export it. And then when we put back nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, we wonder why we're getting degradation. Well, your bank account will degrade in the same way. You know, if you don't leave the essential elements in there, eventually the bank account will just go bankrupt. And that's what's happening to Australia's agricultural soils. We started the first Groundswell version, a program, the collection process is actually called City to Soil, and we started the first City to Soil trial in Queanbeyan in 2003-04, and we found we got terrific support from people. We had less than 1% contamination in the products we were collecting, but in that instance we were only collecting yard waste. But we had terrific results, and we also used that product on a trial where we were growing grapes in the Captain's Flat area, and we found that we could actually increase productivity by about $1,300 in terms of value to that farmer who was growing those grapes. The Groundswell Project is principally about engaging communities in the diversion of organic material from landfill. The most important aspect of it is to actually get people appreciating the fact that they can participate in that program by producing a clean, quality, source separated product that's turned into a compost that then goes into agriculture.
We did some research to find out what would get people to participate in the program and what would make people source separate their food waste and garden waste for us. We found that there was no one universal reason why people would do it, but there was actually 6 reasons why people would do it. And that is they would do it to help reduce waste to landfill, help reduce waste costs, to help improve agricultural soils, to support local farmers, to help address climate change and to win prizes. So obviously not all of those motivators are going to work for everyone, and some of them are not going to be relevant to some people, but others will be relevant to others. So we make sure that when we put out our media releases or our information brochure, that we make sure we at least allude to each of those 6 motivators. It helps to make sure we get universal participation in the project.
About 4 or 5 years ago, council became involved through this combined application to the state government for some funds to carry out this project, and there were some other councils, Goulburn, Queanbeyan and Palerang councils, and Lachlan council ended up in a partnership to run a Groundswell green waste composting trial over 3 years. It was a bit of a shock to us when we actually found out that we were part of the grant application, and when it actually was approved, we then had to really start putting some hard work into getting it up and running. And we've entered into a partnership with a local Aboriginal group called the WCC, Wiradjuri Queanbeyan Corporation. They're a group of Aboriginal people that set up some businesses in town. Our model with them is that they do the collection and the processing of the waste, and eventually we'll do the selling of the final product, whereas the other councils are council operated, run by day labour from council staff, and they do the whole process themselves, whereas here we've farmed it out to a third party.
Our involvement with the Groundswell Project started under an MOU with the Lachlan Shire Council. We have a working partnership that has allowed us to learn together. We started with a zero knowledge base, and we've actually taken on an affiliation with TAFE, and we have a trainer, Dennis Byrne, who comes out and works with the staff. He's taught us how to process the compost, and it's been a really extremely good process and a good experience for all of us.
At the moment, we've basically piggybacked off our existing organic waste service, which kicked off in 2007. I'm using my existing staff, I'm using my existing equipment. We haven't put on any extra staff, we haven't put on any extra equipment to complete the Groundswell process, collecting from curbside and then processing the product that comes in. The idea of the project was to get it back onto the farming land. That's what Goulburn Council has tried to stick to, opposed to selling it back to residents and or market gardens. I'd really like to see it go back onto agricultural country where it came from initially.
Well, unlike Lachlan and Goulburn Mulwaree's green waste project, the one in Palerang will differ in that council will only be involved in collecting the waste and taking it to the local farm that will actually do the composting. That way, the advantage of that is that council's not dealing with the waste after it collects it. It doesn't have to operate tips for that part of the waste. It doesn't have to cut that part of the waste away to another place in the future. What we're essentially volunteered to do is to build a composting facility which meets the EPA requirements and Sydney water catchment requirements. And that facility is an enclosed facility for receiving the food waste and the green waste that will be collected from the 2 shires. Then managing the process, it's basically a volunteer process, and on our part managing the manpower to separate any contamination out of it, to build the compost piles, to manage the composting process from receipt until it's finally finished and ready for application to the land. And then we'll take it to the next stage, which is apply it to land and then run the test of viability and quality of transformation of the soils as a result of those end tests, and then feed that all back into the project. The advantage of Groundswell, as opposed to taking all of our waste to Woodlawn, is that we can take the organic
tonnage out of that waste, save the gate fees on that, take it to a farmer who can make use of it and improve the soils in our area.
Well, my role in the Groundswell Project has been to put a practical agricultural perspective on the project. The rates that we've used in this trial are very low, and some people have asked, well, why bother with such low rates? But the fact remains that if compost is to be a practical input for farmers, it needs to be productive. In the designing of the trials, I've used rates of 5, 10 and 20 cubic metres to the hectare. The outcome of the trials have been interesting. There have been some very positive signs that compost is a very valuable input in agriculture and also in land rehabilitation. Farmers generally are very, very optimistic. They're watching the trials and the whole process very closely. And I think if it's successful and we're able to prove that compost is an economic agricultural input, the farmers will be lining up with their trucks to take it away.